This is Idlib in Syria, where government attacks have killed more than 100 people in just the last 10 days. The UN says this is a war crime, and the world is looking away. So have we become indifferent to the slaughter of Syria's people? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Martine Dennis. Now, the Syrian government's offensive on the last rebel stronghold has been described as relentless, and the United Nations says the world is ignoring this bloodshed. Idlib province in northwestern Syria is home to 3 million people. Nearly half of them were opposition fighters and their families who were relocated from other parts of the country as President Bashar Al Assad's forces gained ground. Government fighters, backed by Russia, began a campaign to take back Idlib in April. At least 450 civilians have been killed since then. But despite this mounting death toll, the UN says the world has become, quote, numb to the carnage.
This is not like it was, in the first few years in the Syria crisis, people really were paying attention and it was constantly in the news. There was a lot of international political engagement and so on. And we're just not seeing that now. It's just like a sort of collective shrug about what's going on in Syria. And it's such a vast scale now, hundreds of thousands of people killed, many hundreds of thousands more, badly injured or even maimed for life. And really the outside world's paying it very, very little attention, and certainly not sustained attention, and certainly attention that's not making any difference or bringing a resolution any closer.
All right, time to introduce our guests now. Here in Doha with me is Marwan Kabalan. He's head of policy analysis at the Arab Centre for Research and Policy Studies. In Idlib province, joining us on Skype, we have civil society activist Nour Hallak. And in Istanbul, we have Yahya Al Aridi, who served as a spokesman for the Syrian Negotiations Commission. Welcome to you all, but let me go straight to you, Nour, in Idlib, and tell us, give us an idea of what life has been like for you and your family since this campaign started at the end of April.
Well, life in Idlib can be described as hell. The humanitarian situation is catastrophic since the very beginning of the campaign. It started in April. I remember in May, I decided to move my family to the north part of Aleppo, where the Turkish government have a mandate there. So I work in Idlib and my family in Aleppo. I go and come to Idlib to finish my work. It's very hard for me now. In the very beginning of the campaign, the UN OCHA documented at least 215,000 people runs away from the targeted areas to the north, to the borders, the Turkish-Syrian borders, as IDPs. At the same time, the fund is decreasing.
Right. Nour, give us an idea, because you've talked about it being hell. We've heard about it. We've heard it being described as carnage, and there is. I mean, we've witnessed, just in terms of pictures, moving pictures that we've seen, the slaughter of many Syrian people. Give us an idea of what an ordinary day can be like in Idlib.
Helicopters and air raids never stops on Idlib. A normal civilian do not know whether this air ride is coming to him or to another city. We always hear on the walkie-talkies all the time that an aircraft takes off from Hama Airport, for example. An aircraft takes off from Latakia. It's all military airports. So the people are in a continuous feeling of terror all the time. We don't know when they will hit us on the ground. Since the beginning of the campaign till now, the regime killed more children than he did kill in 2018. In every air raid, we lose at least 10 to 15 people. Like half of them are children. In Marwan Nu'man, in one air raid, there was 55 people killed. Today, in Ariha city, 11 people were killed. 7 of them are women and children. So killing is every day. People do not know what to do. Most of people are afraid and running towards to the shelters where there is no food, no shelter, no care. Even the medical care is getting worse because most of the international organizations seized fund for the medical operations in Syria. Hospitals are being shelled, and the civil defense also centers are being shelled. So that's why I'm telling it it's hell.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Yahya Al Aridi in Istanbul, you've been part of this rather lengthy process of negotiation, which ultimately seemed to have come to nothing. The opposition seemed to have failed. How does it make you feel when you hear and see those pictures coming from Idlib province?
Well, first of all, I have to think about the narrative presented by the regime and Russia about why they are doing this. They talk about the right of central government to control its territory. And to control its territory, that's why when one hears such a narrative, immediately they would think that this is the right thing, and as such, they would not sympathize with what is happening at the level of people, civilians and unarmed people, and children being killed. Another thing, they say that they are fighting terrorism. And they say that those terrorists are concentrated in Idlib. And I'd like really to show you some pictures about those terrorists that Mr. Putin and Mr. Assad are targeting. These are the pictures of the children that they are the terrorists that they are targeting. And this is another one, if you can see this. Those are all children, actually. And this is another one.
Yes, Yahya, it's been pretty well documented. Sorry to cut you short, but it's been pretty well documented that we are dealing specifically with the number of civilian casualties in Idlib province, which has been deemed by the United Nations as well as other NGOs as war crimes being committed almost on a daily basis. But tell me, what is the relationship? And this is something that perhaps I can come to Nour about in a minute. But first of all, you, Yahya, what is the relationship then between the fighters? Because there are fighters in Idlib. What is the relationship between the fighters and the civilian population?
Well, some of those fighters are part of the indigenous population. They at a certain time felt that they had nobody and they had to affiliate themselves with certain other groups in order to defend themselves. This is one. Another thing, there are some foreigners. And we ourselves said that those foreigners should go back to their countries. And according to Sochi, there was an agreement that al-Nusra should be removed from that place. This is what was agreed upon. But it cannot be something that happens in a fortnight. It needs time. And they can easily be used as a pretext, as the Russians and the regime are doing. And as such, as you can see, that they are just the results out of this are victims who are civilians and mainly children. And the target of all the Russian raids are basically civilian places like hospitals, like markets, like medical centers, in order to make life impossible for those people.
Right.
And you talked about the flooding of hundreds of thousands of people. Now, this is basically the relationship, and they use it, the Russians and the regime use it as a pretext to carry out their vicious and criminal acts.
Right, okay.
And this is being documented, as you are saying, but at the same time, the world should pay attention to what is happening. There must be something happening internationally to protect Syrians.
Perfect, then, for me to take that point and put it to Marwan Kabalan, who's with me here in Doha. Part of the UN's castigation, if you like, of the international community is the fact that nothing is being done. The world is witnessing some of the most horrendous scenes, some of which we've seen in this programme already, and nothing is being done. What's happening?
Well, Martine, I think the UN finds itself very much powerless in this conflict. But there are 2 points here that we can talk about. On the one hand, you have the regional and international players who are actively involved in the Syrian conflict, and they are fighting a war by proxy against each other, but using Syrian blood. So they are willing to fight actually until the last drop of Syrian blood. And this applies actually to Russia, the United States, Turkey, Iran, and other actors. On the other hand, you have the wider international community, which, as I said before, find itself very much powerless towards this conflict, since these regional and international powers are involved. They have the veto power in the Security Council. They have military power on the ground. And as you said, they are using civilians as a leverage in order to achieve political ends in this conflict.
But what about the United States? We know that there are certain interests, particularly with regard to the SDF forces in this part of Syria, well, much more to the east of the country. But the United States has an historic role as being the upholder, if you like, of rules and regulations globally. But that clearly is a position that has now been vacated.
Absolutely, and
by Trump, but also not just Trump, of course, because, of course, the former administration as well.
Absolutely, you're right. I think the United States has become, especially after the invasion of Iraq, very much the lack of interest of the United States in the region has grown after the failure of the invasion of Iraq. The Americans, they don't want really to get really involved unless their vital interests are affected, whether in Syria or in other place in the region. And especially under this administration, the Trump administration, we don't see any concern about human rights. We don't see any concern about human lives. And I believe that President Trump has been very open many times, actually, in saying that the United States will not be interfering anywhere in the world unless our vital interests are affected. So we can understand the U.S. position, actually, from this perspective.
And Nour, coming back to you, what would you expect outsiders, particularly members of the Security Council, the permanent 5 members, to be doing to stop this hell in which you and the other people of Idlib are having to endure?
I'm sorry, but they did nothing in 2014, 2015, and etc. to 2019. And one comment about the U.S. interest: if there is 1 or 2 wells of oil in Idlib, you would see Trump there. We would have like the eastern parts of Syria. So the Security Council is very weak. It becomes a puppet in the hands of the 5 super countries. They cannot issue any solution that can restrict the regime or the Russians. We are not speaking about now the opposition and the regime. We're speaking about Russia and USA with Turkey. Like a few weeks ago, some of the military factions in Syria were saying that Turkey said we cannot give you anti-aircraft weapons because that will lead to a direct war with Russia. Right. So Turkey is afraid to interfere. So it's the same with USA. So these superpowers are controlling Syria now, and that my colleague said, like they don't care about the Syrian bloc.
Okay. Yahya, is there any level of dialogue currently going on involving you or even other elements of the Syrian people?
I'll get back to this particular point, but let me just relate to what needs to be done or what can be done. Actually, the Russians have taken the Security Council hostage all this time during the Syrian tragedy. They used the veto over 12 times in order to protect this brutal regime. There is an article in the UN Charter, article number 27, and it talks about a certain member of the Security Council of the 5 who is a partner to a certain conflict, who is a real influential party to a certain conflict, that should be denied voting when this particular conflict is being discussed. And this particular thing hasn't been talked about till now.
Right.
Those 4 other members should present the case, and here comes the dialogue. We are sending really letters to the Security Council, to the UN Secretary, Mr. Guterres, and to other influential countries in the world about this particular thing. So this tragedy should stop.
Right.
This is one thing that can be done. And another
I just wanted to bring you back to the issue of dialogue. I mean, we understand that there is possibly a move towards trying to create some sort of safe zone in northern Syria, but that's being worked out between the United States and Turkey. Where are the Syrian components of dialogue with regard to the future, particularly of Idlib?
Well, just to be frank and honest, the Syrian element within all what is happening in Syria, be it the opposition, be it other organizations, etc., is quite minor. Syria is being subjected to different kinds of occupation, at least 5 of them now. And they are the ones that have the say in what goes on, in particular Russia, the United States, Turkey, Iran, Israel, and others. Now, if they have any influence over that, it would be with the outcome of such a conflict with regard to those who are being displaced from their country, who are homeless now, and to the victims, to the martyrs, to those who are still in jail. And this is a very important weapon. In addition to that, the documentation that we have all over the world about the brutality of the regime. As such, the SNC, Syrian Negotiations Commission, is trying to send a message and to be quite effective in whatever goes on with regard to the political process and with regard to the northeastern side concerning a safe zone being created. We are in continuous discussion with the Turks about this particular thing. And we take into consideration the FCDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, that they are there, and there are discussions between them and those who are partners to them, the Americans. And we know that, we hope and we work for that Syria one day would be free from all those occupations and free them from that brutal regime that has been suppressing it for years and years.
Okay, and Marwan, so is it this tantalizing prospect then of some sort of safe zone being negotiated between the Turks and the Americans? Is this the only slither of hope for the people of Idlib at this moment?
No, I think it's to the contrary. Just one word on the Syrian component in this whole issue. I think the Syrian component exists only on the ground with this blood being spilled in Idlib, whereas negotiations are taking place between the patrons, the great and regional powers in fancy offices. And the Idlib in this case is being used as a post office or a post box actually to exchange messages between these different players. As far as the Syrian Democratic Forces and the safe zone on the eastern of the Euphrates, I think I believe it's one problem, it's one cause of this conflict, because we all know that Russia is using Idlib actually in order to put pressure on Turkey. The Russians, they are very much upset with the news talking about the possible agreement between Turkey and the United States on the establishment of a safe zone on the eastern part of Syria in the east of the Euphrates, and they are very angry about it. And in my opinion, they are trying to punish Turkey, whereas they are punishing the Syrians, because both sides, those who are dying actually, whether regime or opposition, are Syrians. Nobody is dying in Syria but Syrians. So the Russians actually are using Idlib in order to put pressure on the Turks, in order to prevent any sort of agreement between Turkey and the United States on eastern of the Euphrates. And don't forget also that this round of conflict started right after the failure of the latest Asatana talks between the Russians and the Turks. So in one way or another, we are being actually used between these different powers, trying actually to negotiate between them.
But Turkish specific interests in terms of the northern part of Idlib, which of course borders onto its territory, surely it's within Turkish interests to have things as calm as possible. Otherwise, I suppose its worst nightmare is a flood of desperate people rushing towards its border. It's already taken around 3 million Syrian refugees.
Well, I think this is, I don't think that this is the right approach to solve the Syrian conflict, because we have to take the Syrian conflict in its totality, i.e. trying actually to reach a political settlement to this conflict, not only for the Eastern Euphrates, not only for Turkey to take its interest into account. We need actually, as Syrians, to look after the interests of our own people, not the interest of Turkey or Iran or Russia or the United States. So the creation of the safe zone in the north of Syria, actually, that actually satisfies Turkey, but it doesn't actually solve the Syrian conflict because it's going on. People are getting killed, as we can all see actually on TV, live on TV, in fact, and nobody is doing anything in order to stop this conflict.
And Nour, I know that you've got at least one child. I think your daughter's about 3 years old now. What sort of life has she had up until now? And what does she tell you about the impressions that she's had of the early part of her life in Idlib?
Well, you will laugh. I convinced my daughter that the rockets that are dropped from the sky by the aircraft are a firework. Me and her mother convinced her with that. So my daughter and my son, they dance when they hear the voice of an aircraft. I feel like when I see them dance, like I know that they don't realize what's coming, but I've seen a lot of children that they have a really psychological problems just by hearing the sounds of a rocket or a aircraft coming closer. Some of them, they have a problem with their eyes. Some of them, they have other psychological or physical problems. And I need to add something to this conversation. Idlib province population in 2012 was 1,400,000. Now we have 3.5 million. So there is at least 2 million people in Idlib province that they decided that they don't want to stay at the regime areas. So attacking Idlib or the regime controlling Idlib means mass killing. A huge number of people will be either killed, or if they are lucky, they will run away to Turkey, then to Europe, and I don't know. So it's nearly impossible that the regime controls Idlib without killing hundreds of thousands of people.
Right. And Yahya, we know that ultimately there is no military solution, is there, to this problem? It's got to be a political one. Do you see that... I mean, I would suggest that maybe Astana has been put to one side. The whole process has been put to one side for now. But do you see any glimmer of hope by which a new round of dialogue can be resuscitated, if you like? Do you think that there's any hope of dialogue restarting?
Well, I do. I really do. Because I have all along been quite optimistic about certain things. Optimism has to be there, otherwise we would vanish. The part of the reason for why this war against Idlib now, against the civilians there, is to gain some geographical grounds in order to translate them into political gains, political cards that could be translated into something important in the political process concerning the implementation of 2254, especially also before Astana.
Right.
I just expect that something could happen before the 1st or 2nd of August when Astana is being held. There is no other way for Russia but to implement 2254. There is no other way to gain any political, to have any political gains on the part of Russia.
Right.
Being pressured to get such a thing without the political process.
Yeah, I have to...
The technique or the tactics...
I have to jump in there. Thank you very much indeed, because we are running out of time.
And they will not get them anywhere.
All right. I'd like to give the last word then to Marwan here with me. Yahya feels that there is at least some hope with regard to the next stage of dialogue in Astana. He says that the Russians have no option but to implement Security Council resolutions regarding Syria. I mean, do you agree?
Yeah, logically, I mean, the Russians should try to find an exit strategy because they cannot carry on like this forever. But I'm not sure whether we are going to see this exit anytime soon.
Marwan Kabalan, thank you very much indeed. Thank you all to our three Syrian guests. Marwan Kabalan here in the studio with me, Nour Hallak in Idlib, and Yahya Al Aridi in Istanbul. Thank you all very much indeed. And as ever, thank you for watching the programme. You can see it again anytime you like by going to the website, aljazeera.com. If you want more discussion, you can always go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And there's always the Twitter sphere. You can talk to us at AJ Inside Story. I'm at Martine Dennis. So from me and the whole team here in Doha, bye for now.